Can anyone see me or hear me? Oh, hi, Triste. Hi. To actually kick in for whatever reason. So hope and see if it works, because it seems to, whenever the wind comes through, it seems to fluctuate a little bit. So hi Chris, how are you doing? Welcome Barbara. Hi Helen. Hope you're, because obviously the readings that it's giving me are a little bit crazy. So this is the reason why we start early. I'm just gonna move over here. No audio. The audio should definitely be working because I can get the reading as perfect. So I am very sorry, chat. This is it was perfect this morning when I tested it all, and of course things changed. Right, let me know if it's improving or not. Are we better? That's really strange. That shouldn't be happening, and that's annoying me, because what the readings that the machine is giving me. Right. Okay. I don't know what to do. I'm gonna try and move a little bit farther up. Thankfully, I recorded all of this earlier in case this went really, really wrong, because I just had a feeling. And I'm gonna see if farther up into this it improves, because otherwise, well, this is gonna be an absolute nightmare. So please bear with me. This is the beauty of live tours, guys. Of course, I had far too many where nothing went absolutely wrong, so this had to be the one. We hadn't been to Winchester in forever, and well, here you have it. And in case you're wondering why some tour guides prefer to do pre-recorded tours, now you know why. Because sometimes we're out, doesn't work the next one. Okay, are we getting better now? Is that getting better? Because if it's getting better, then we're gonna start over here properly speaking. So thank you so much for your patience. Right, in which case we're gonna have to change slightly the route that I wanted to do, since obviously the weather, internet, whatever is not cooperative. So hello everybody, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Lilian Céspedes González, Lily for everyone else, and it is doctor because I have a PhD in history from the University of Winchester. And today we're kind of gonna have to wing it, because the original tour I had planned is not playing ball with our signal. So my apologies if I seem to be a little bit sort of trying to figure out what I'm doing, but when the original route is not gonna work. So let's hope that everything works out. If it gets really bad after a while, maybe we shall try again at some other point. But here I go. I'm just gonna turn around the camera and hope for the best, because yeah. No, that's not the right button. There we go. Okay. Excellent. Well, starting here right by the Guildhall, which is the last Guildhall of Winchester, and it's a beautiful Victorian building that we have in here. This was commissioned at the end of the 19th century in 1887, if I remember correctly, to be the final destination for the local authorities of Winchester. It is actually considered one of the best examples of medievalism architecture in England, because as you can see, it combines some Gothic elements over here, but that tower borrows from Romanesque and a few other bits and bobs. So it's a very interesting architectural feature. The entire inspiration for this is the many churches we have all across the city, of course, which have been very important throughout the medieval times. And this building, beautiful as it is, unfortunately, is now just a very ugly set of offices inside. So I'm just gonna try and get us through up the stairs so you can see the main entrance into the Guildhall, which is not used anymore, but that will give us at least a little idea as to what the original purpose of this building was. So aside from being a Guildhall for the local authorities to use and essentially we needed this building to have a double function. And this is what you can read here in this plaque. License in pursuance of an Act of Parliament for music and dancing. So, the entire purpose of making this building here was not just to have a better area for the administration of town, but pray that some London money would come here and finance us, which didn't necessarily go according to plan. So by hoping that if we created a music and dancing hall, people would come in here, and if not finance us, at least be entertained and drip some money into the town, well, we essentially made up for the loss of income. Winchester isn't a particularly wealthy town in the 19th century, unlike we had been previously, so unfortunately we do lose out in that particular aspect. Right, let me just take the steps back, because I need to look at the floor, so please bear with me 1 second. So, one of the reasons why Winchester isn't particularly wealthy during this time period is entirely our fault. You're going to see that we have here a commemoration for the Jubilee, and that was entirely our fault. The locals were actually rallied by the Bishop of Winchester to actually essentially sabotage her marriage to Prince Albert. And as a result, she essentially decided that, well, if we weren't going to support her, she couldn't see the reason to support us. And that is why, well, we needed to try and attract London money in other ways, in the hopes that, you know, Victoria would eventually forgive us. Disclaimer, it didn't happen, it never happened, we were still, you know, bust. But hey, we tried, for sure. And I am not entirely sure why the flag is at half mast. I don't think it is, I think it's just wrapped a bit funny because of the wind. Let me give you that one, Chris. But I think that's the reason why. There is an event here organized by the Southampton, what is it called? The Southampton Design Department. They have a fashion show, so I don't know if that may be the reason why. Well, here we also have the stone that was laid out by the Lord Viscount Eversley to essentially commission and commemorate the building itself. And here we have the original and then redone Victorian latitude and longitude for Winchester, as you can see, still all behind the box. And well, a lot of this was actually redone in 1954, 1955, something like that, straight after the Second World War. So, as you can see, the building now is essentially just being repurposed for fitting whatever the city needs, which in this moment in time is just offices and our visitor information center, which unfortunately means that a lot of people don't ever come down this way because we're too far away. That we're approaching just now. So many people, unfortunately, when they come to town, miss this very gorgeous building, which is a very important symbol of the architecture of the city and, well, a great part of the late Victorian architecture of the country. Well, we are now properly engaging with the High Street in the area that we call the Broadway. And we call it the Broadway because you're going to see that this part of town is a little bit wider than the main High Street itself. And that is because the majority of these buildings over here were designed in the 19th century alongside with the expansion of Winchester that promoted the construction of the Guildhall. Most of this, again, was designed to attract businesses into the area that would take us out of our huge misery. And you're probably wondering, well, how could a town like Winchester end up in misery? Well, we were very, very strong and powerful from the sort of 9th century all the way up to the English Civil War. But unfortunately, you know, when Parliament decided to go cutting around the head of the king and what have you not, us being a royalist town essentially ended up in the wrong side of the argument. And as a result, well, the town is going to suffer very severely during the English Civil War, which is in the 17th century, and we are never really going to recover after that. So it will take us pretty much up until the Second World War to lift up from where we properly left it in the Middle Ages. After the Second World War, the majority of people that came here came because this had been an area that hadn't been destroyed by the bombs. There was a lot of area to reclaim and to build, so it was quite good for businesses, but mostly for residential purposes. And as you can see, the market has just, or is just folding up, but here is my favorite stall, which is the flower guy. He's been here God knows how long, for ages, and it's amazing because it's one of the very few places in town and even in Southampton where you can buy flowers almost every day. Well, there's somebody else using a microphone. I don't know if that's interfering with what I'm saying. Hopefully you can still hear me all okay, but we're moving away from them, so never mind. Now, the High Street of Winchester, where we are right now, is nothing special in comparison with any other high streets in the UK. In fact, we very nearly lost it all during the pandemic, because the majority of these brands that you will see here are not necessarily local and independent buildings. They are all, well, things that you can find in every other town, which is a shame because Winchester didn't used to be like that when I originally moved into the city in the year 2009. But you know, sometimes these things happen and there is not an awful lot that you can do to change that. Thankfully now, between the students and a lot of people who have moved away from London, we are able to finally take the town back to where it used to be. And that's a very new shop, Ronnie. I don't really know exactly what they do. I think it's some kind of fashionable clothes, but I'm very, very lost as to what exactly the Suave Owl actually sells. This, by the way, here in Market Street used to be part of the original Central Market of Winchester in the 20th century. Now, of course, Starbucks had to be. It's a serious problem we have in this town. Rent is very, very high. So, you know, buildings that are of important historical decoration or whatever end up with big, you know, trademarks that can afford the very high rents. And why do I say that? Because in case you didn't know, Winchester is actually considered one of the most expensive towns to live in the whole of England. It is London first, then Oxford, then Winchester. So, you know, it's one of those situations. It's men's clothing. Fair enough. I've learned something today. Obviously, not necessarily my target shop. Now, I just wanted to show you here very recent example of the emerging street art that is coming into the town. This is a painting by Hendog, who is actually a local artist. He has a couple of bits like this, not just in Winchester. He's starting also doing some work in Southampton, Salisbury, Portsmouth, etc. So we're trying to find, you know, a space for our street artists into the whole of the south of England. With the whole, you know, wow, okay, the Jaguar Park next to me has decided to go, so we're gonna move. The whole Banksy effect really has taken a lot of street art, you know, by storm in the UK. So everybody kind of wants to be, you know, part of the thing. Hey Laurie, how are you doing? Thank you so much for joining us here. It seems that the connection is a bit more stable, at least now. So thank you so much, everybody, for, you know, hanging in there. And well, we were not supposed to be here at this moment in time. We were supposed to be getting to the cathedral, you know, in about 20 minutes time, but you know, we're already here, so we might as well dive in. Since I'm gonna have to wing most of it. Right, I'm gonna do something that I don't normally do, which is taking us to the side of the cathedral, so you can understand properly how this monument has changed over time. Because the Cathedral of Winchester started as a Romanesque cathedral built by under the commission of William the Conqueror shortly after the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And why Romanesque and why Winchester? Because back then we were the capital of the kingdom. We had been the capital of the kingdom since the time of King Alfred the Great in the 9th century, and we would be the capital of the kingdom until the end of the 12th century, when the Normans essentially decide that London is just a lot more convenient for them to, you know, run business from there. And that is how we end up with this, which is, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful cathedrals we have in this country. Perhaps, if I get a little bit full of myself, one of the most beautiful and interesting Gothic cathedrals that we have in Western Europe. I know that's a big claim, but what you're seeing here is the perfect mix between the original Romanesque structure and then the Gothic decoration. So as you see, our tower, unlike for example in Salisbury, for those of you who have been there with me, and if you haven't, the tour is literally in the stream section. This is a typical lantern, as we call it, a Norman lantern, which is just a square tower. And you can see how in origin this cathedral was actually very full and solid. That's why we have so many of those beautiful round arches, which as time has gone by have ended up being transformed into Gothic, which is what you start seeing a bit better here on the right. Well, the Cathedral of William the Conqueror had to be a very special place. You know, this was essentially one of the very first cathedrals he commissions, and in the capital of the kingdom. We had to display power. It's a bit more dirty because, you know, people don't necessarily come face it over here that much, but you will see in a moment how the stone normally looks like. This is all limestone, and actually the majority of it is con stone, so it came from Normandy. It was brought over, shipped over, because William the Conqueror had to send a very strong message here in Winchester. We were under new management, and he needed to build churches and anything really, just like he would back home. He couldn't really afford to have a small Saxon rebellion here as soon as he arrived, so that's why he put a lot of emphasis into this being built like a proper Norman cathedral would have been built in Normandy. Eventually, when the Normans realized that we have perfectly good quarries in the area of the Isle of Wight and farther down towards Portland and, you know, the Jurassic coast of Dorset, then they started bringing more, I'll say it, more stone locally. But until that happened, a lot of it was essentially brought back from Normandy. Well, we're just gonna go to the front of the cathedral now, and in the meantime, you can see the lovely gardens that we have in here. And the cathedral gardens used to be the original cemetery of Winchester, by the way. No longer a cemetery. We actually have some important laws that curate this kind of land. In England, you cannot have a grave for more than 100 years. The land has to be reclaimed and then sanitized, because in case you didn't know, well, actually, human remains are quite a big source of pollution. So that's we wouldn't be under any danger whatsoever. And that's why now everybody comes here and essentially treats it like a public park for, you know, picnic and that kind of stuff. Right, well, I want to give you a new angle of the cathedral from over here, just so you can see how the Gothic starts shaping. But many of you are going to notice that this Gothic is not, you know, entirely there, because we are missing something crucial of Gothic, which are the flying buttresses, right? We do have those beautiful tracery windows, which are the pointed arches with the bits and bobs of stained glass, but we are missing the flying buttresses. And that is because, well, the Gothic that you see here is a kind of essentially fake. And I'll explain what I mean with that in just one moment. Before I do that though, I want to show you, if the light allows, because I can see that the sun is just coming shining very, very abruptly, the archaeological outline of the church that was here beforehand, and that was the church of our dear King Alfred the Great. So let me get to the best spot possible. I'm just gonna have to balance myself on this fence, because as you guys know, I'm a little bit vertically challenged. So, you see the black brick there on the line? Well, if you follow it all the way here to the back, you're gonna notice this has kind of the shape of a church, essentially, where the altar should be, and then moving over here to where the base of the cathedral is currently standing, and that goes into the shade. Well, the original cathedral of King Alfred the Great, the old Minster, actually was located here in the center of Winchester, and King Alfred used to be buried right there, roughly in the, not in the first patch of grass that you are seeing right now, but in the one next to it. What's the issue? Well, when William the Conqueror arrives here, like I said, he needed to have a very, I guess, strong agenda to Normanize the country. He destroys the vast majority of our Anglo-Saxon heritage, or replaces it, which is the reason why, unfortunately, we don't really have much of it remaining. It's all essentially Norman when we look at the Middle Ages or later. And that is, again, to display the power, to display the fact that there is a new dynasty running the show. As a result, of course, the church of dear King Alfred in the old capital of the kingdom could not be left standing. It would literally be asking for trouble, right? And you would be almost telling people, hey, go worship your hero while I bring this new cathedral over to you. It wouldn't necessarily be good for business, not good PR. So he puts it down. But the burial of King Alfred is salvaged and taken to the outskirts of town to the foundation of Hyde Abbey, where we're going to go hopefully next month, although much of it does not remain, unfortunately. Well, as a result, the cathedral is going to be slightly delayed by having to pull the previous building down and then eventually building this. Well, I'm just going to take us now, properly speaking, to the front so we can talk about the Gothic architecture of Winchester Cathedral a bit better, which is going to be easy to do now because the shine is just coming through in perfect timing. So let me just take a couple of steps back so I can be in the shade, because otherwise I'm not going to be able to see the actual screen. Right. So here at the shade of the Second World War Memorial, you can see the west end of Winchester Cathedral. This that you're seeing right here, right now, is considered the best example of English perpendicular Gothic ever. And why is that? Well, I will break it down to you in just one moment, but essentially Gothic in the UK happens a little bit different than in the rest of Europe. So perpendicular Gothic is exclusive, actually not even to the UK, to England. And this cathedral really highlights everything that was important about that. I'm sure that you can see we have a lot of straight lines, which is not necessarily something that we associate with Gothic entirely. And the tracery windows are actually very tall, thin, but also very huge, like the one that you have here, the front screen of Winchester. Well, the reason why we get away with such an, epic kind of display of Gothic is because, like I mentioned earlier, this is all actually fake. What you're seeing in here right now is not Gothic in the sense of an architectural development. It's all chisel work. Now, style with strong stone was essentially that this was a very solid building that you couldn't really mess about with, if you see what I mean. So when we need to renovate the cathedral, we already have that construction to depart from. The majority of west screens in Romanesque are a bit lacking in terms of decoration, and perhaps some of you may recall this was a similar case in Salisbury, hence why they fill it in with all of those fake statues later in the 19th century. But in the case of Winchester, we needed to address a much larger problem. And the problem is that we encounter the Black Death, of course. In the 14th century, the Black Death is going to be, well, an issue for everybody. Half of the human population essentially, goes and dies in a matter of about 7 years and a half, which is a very big shock for everybody. And during that time period, essentially everybody thought that they had been punished by God. So you could not come in to church, you couldn't, attend services normally. And in case you don't know, the Black Death is actually a very nasty kind of illness, which left everybody, in massive shock. Everybody goes into, this big state of, well, essentially not knowing what to do with themselves and starting to think some pretty strange and silly things. So, well, when we eventually can come back to church, we find that we cannot convince people to go back to Romanesque churches, because the liturgy and the actual structure essentially is for a much more fear-inducing type of narrative. Now, before I continue talking about this, I'm going to see if we can at least go to the front of the cathedral, because I think they are about to start service, but we may be able to have a quick peek. Obviously, while I'm in here, I cannot really talk, but I hope that you're enjoying the views. Yeah, indeed to the wall. Right, well, I'm not really gonna be able to go much further away than here because, like I said, service is happening and we really shouldn't interrupt. But you can see why this is such a stunning piece of architecture. Yes, actually, I was trying to get to her burial before we left, at least so I could show you. But I don't know if it's gonna be too far into the service area. I'm just gonna have a very quick look, so bear with me and see if I can show you the tomb of dear Jane. I think we may get lucky. So any fans of Jane Austen, this is gonna have to be very quick because they're about to close this section for the mass. But let me just bring us into focus. And let me show you the burial place for Jane, which is right here. And I'll explain why Jane is buried here once we're outside of the cathedral. There you have it. So this was the original memorial plaque. And then I'll show you the, I'll say it. The bronze. And here on the right, sorry, I just was waiting for a lady to pass through with a wheelchair. Here, as you see, where the flowers and the commemorations are, we have this memorial in bronze for Jane Austen, which actually was done a lot later. It was actually erected in the year 1900 by public subscription because, well, the original burial for Jane Austen was actually quite a bit of a tricky situation. I don't know if we can go much further. I think this section is still open, so let me see if we can maybe catch a glimpse of the choir. And otherwise we'll get too close to the organ and we won't be able to see anything at all. All right, here we go. Not bad, eh? For the best example of English perpendicular Gothic in the country. No worries, my pleasure. We've honestly gotten lucky. I didn't think we would be able to because they're starting service and normally this is all cut off. So this is honestly just a pure happy coincidence. So enjoy it while it lasts. Maybe that's why we shouldn't have done the other route. Maybe fate wanted us to come inside the cathedral. Right, so I can see that this other side is now cut off, so we should probably head out. But before I do that, I just want to show you the stained glass window from this side. I'm so glad that you enjoy that, Tish. It's really something that, yeah, this is now close here because the kids that sing in the choir are about to come through for evensong. So I'll make my way out and let them to their very lovely, singing, which unfortunately we won't be able to catch today, but perhaps some other day, if fate wants it so, since it did the same today. Well, it's always possible to bring flowers to Jane, so don't let the distance put you off. And one last view of the beautiful stained glass window before we go. there you go. I think that's probably one of the best shots I've ever taken of this cathedral in my life. Huh. Okay, well, we are now gonna be saying goodbye to the cathedral. So there we go. If we didn't have the inside of the cathedral planned for the internet, well, I know, right? Indeed, thank the internet for being rubbish by the river to bring us in here. Because not just that, it's honestly been serendipity. Now that I can speak with a bit more freedom, we normally cannot go inside of the cathedral because, you know, it's full of visitors and you can't actually go in there and film or anything when they are out there. So that doesn't happen very often. The only time where we ever were able to do that was when the Queen died, because they were able to, you know, let everybody capture that very, you know, magnificent moment. So I'm kind of shocked that there was nobody at the entrance, which normally there is when they're about to start service. I think we literally just caught the half-an-hour interim period where everybody sort of was just happy to let anyone in, because there was a bunch of other people that came right behind us. So hey, tour didn't necessarily go according to plan, but I'm not complaining. I don't know about you guys, but that was completely shocking for me. So right, now that I'm outside and I can recollect my thoughts, let me explain the thing with Jane. And I'm glad that you guys have enjoyed it. Hopefully those of you who have toured in Salisbury with me now will understand why I think Winchester is much more beautiful. Salisbury doesn't have anything like that inside. So, you know, it's a different type of Gothic because it's much earlier. Right. Let me collect my thoughts. So Jane is buried here in Winchester Cathedral because she did die here, but she dies under a bit peculiar circumstances, and it's kind of one of those things that we honestly don't have enough evidence to say one way or another. And actually, let me see if I can frame the cathedral in one of the best shots that we normally get in here by the tree. There you go. That's as much of the cathedral as we can see in one bit. And well, yeah, buffering was a blessing in disguise indeed. Well, you know, completely silver lining in this case. Now, as I was saying, Jane dies here. She literally comes and lives in Winchester for 4 weeks, and then she dies in a house that was owned by Winchester College, and that actually we were going to be seeing today if the internet wouldn't have, you know, played a number on us. So one way or another we were going to see Jane. And the thing is, only 10 people attend her funeral, which everybody seems very shocked about. But, you know, back in the day, families were spread, you know, very far away in the country. You only could travel by horse carriage because Jane dies in 1817, so the railway is not fully, you know, in full motion. So if someone dies today, they're in the ground tomorrow. By the time you receive the notification telling you they've unfortunately passed, you can't make it in time. So there is no big conspiracy. It's just, you know, it just wasn't a thing that you could do physically. And management of the routes and transportation. So that clarifies why very few people turn up to the memorial and why the memorial is so simple. The reason why we think Jane comes here to die is because her sister Cassandra was living here in a house adjacent to the cathedral, and she essentially knows she's very ill. So she decides to come over here to be with Cassandra, who was essentially her best friend, as a way of, you know, staying with her, I guess, forever and ever. But there are a few controversies around the whole situation with Jane that we are still trying to figure out, and we can't quite figure it out because, unfortunately, many of her late diaries and letters were completely burned or destroyed, we think either by Cassandra or her mother. And the reason for that we are not entirely sure about, actually, but we think it is because they disclose or they give too much information about the reason behind Jane's deaths, which probably was a very aggressive form of cancer, by the way. Well, we have now moved on. We are now in Winchester Square, and as you can see, we have the very nice building of the City Museum in here, which, funnily enough, is a 19th century construction that originally was actually the prison of the town. The reason why we brought the prison here was because originally it was in the High Street, and in the 19th century, considering we had already made Queen Victoria quite upset, it didn't seem good to have the prison right in the center of town. So instead, we bring it, you know, to the back streets. And as a result, it also made sense because the square where we are now, which is the main square of Winchester, used to be the area for public executions back in the day. The last public execution that took place right here was in the middle of the 19th century, in the 1850s, if I remember correctly, when this now is changed and deemed illegal by the English government. And now we are gonna go, I think, up this way into the high street. I'm just trying to figure out where fate wants us to go now. And I reckon we're gonna go over this way. Now, can you see where that tower is right here in front of us? Well, that is actually where the original location of the palace of William the Conqueror used to be situated. And the majority of the buildings that you see that suddenly sort of cut into the street, we have a flat line and then they cut into, that is where the palace of Winchester used to be. And the reason why William the Conqueror, of course, puts his palace right here in the middle of the town is the same than with the cathedral. You know, people need to understand that the town is under new management. And if fate wants it again, I don't know, we may be able to see his own personal chapel. Well, baboom. There is nobody inside, so might as well try it. I've never really done this properly with the beak. There you go. It doesn't really look like what it used to be back in the Middle Ages. Of course, all of this is mostly a modern reinterpretation of the church once it becomes a Protestant church instead of, you know, part of the... It's actually open 24/7, which is, you know, very good, because most churches, in our simplicity of it all, is quite magnificent. And here on the side, if I can do between this room and William the Conqueror's personal apartments in the actual palace. So does it look like what he used to have here? Not at all. But at least we've been able to preserve the building somewhat and given it a new life, because, well, under the period of the Reformation, it was at the risk of actually all being destroyed and demolished. Faith imposed into not just the city, but the whole country. So the fact that we have it is still pretty good. Well, I'm gonna head back outside, bear with me. And just underneath the doorway, obviously it's not as impressive as what we've used in the cathedral, but you know, how can I follow that up? But anyway, just passing over to Winchester High Street. I'm just going under a little archway, so that can sometimes affect signal. So please bear with me as I sort of try to reposition myself. Right, okay, well, we are in the High Street. And well, we were actually going to be finishing the tour here, so I will just go a little bit further up, and that's probably where we will call it. But I just wanted to show you this area here. This is the Pentis over there, the building with the sort of colonnade onto the side. The Pentis is a very interesting feature of Winchester. Essentially, it just goes to show that people in this town have always been very cheeky. Yeah, it's very charming, but we're very cheeky-ish. Because I'm sure you can all see how in the Pentis area, essentially you get pretty much an extra room, right, that is not touching the floor. Well, the taxes at the time essentially said that you needed to pay according to the amount of land that was touching the public ground. Notice how the area that is hanging literally over the wooden colonnades is not really touching public ground of any kind. So essentially, the buildings that we see here would have been a workshop at the bottom or a shop like they are nowadays, and the two layers on top would have been, you know, for the owners of the building to use as their personal quarters or storage. So they were essentially cheating the taxman. That's what I'm saying. And we also know that there are a few dodgy dealings that happen in those little archways, because they're essentially like a fiscal paradise. Since you're not paying taxes, although they are in front of your shop, you can technically sell something in there, but you are not necessarily going to find the backup and the support of the guilds in case something, you know, goes wrong. So we have a couple of situations where things get a little bit hairy. Yeah, playground logic 100%. Very common and popular building here in Winchester, which is this funny spire. This is what we call the Buttercross, and I mean butter as in, you know, the butter spread. And it receives that name because, as you can see, the monument is perfectly in the shade now, even though we have plenty of sunshine coming through. So the market back in the Middle Ages came from the main square where we've just been, all the way here and down the high street. Imagine what would happen to the butter if we are literally right there where I'm pointing the camera to. It would melt very quickly, right? Well, our cheeky butter sellers, once again, realized that this monument that had been commissioned by the Guildhall to essentially be kind of like a public, public announcement platform kind of thing, is entirely made out of stone, and if you put butter in there, obviously it's not gonna melt. So after it was used for official businesses, they would climb those stairs and they would get on top of it and shout whatever is it that you shout to sell butter in Tudor times. I'm not about to recreate to make business. And it was so profitable that although we've not sold butter there for about 150 to 100 years, we still call it the Buttercross, because to us, to the collective memory of the town, that's what it is and what it was. So now you understand a little bit more of how the locals in this community used to work. Lower taxes are always good, of course, 100%. But just so you can see the ingenuity, the building that, the one that has the sort of bay windows, the Winchester Bakery, used to be the prison. The one next to it in the wood, it was the first, the proper first Guildhall of the Middle Ages that survived. So, people evading taxes and doing all of this with the butter were right in the middle of town, right in the nose of the local authorities, essentially just doing whatever they wanted, which, well, I think that tells you a thing or two about the locals. So, I don't think I'm gonna be able to get to the statue of Licoricia, which is a shame, because that's something that I wanted to do. Perhaps I'll try, actually. We still have 15 minutes and the signal seems still quite steady, so maybe I'll push it. Maybe I'll just, what in there. If it gets too silly, we'll stop, but I'll try and get to Licoricia statue. Just want to show you a few more of the beautiful buildings that we have in the local area. This is another beautiful Tudor frame, God house. This dates from 1505, if I remember correctly. If it's not 05, it's 1502. One way or another, early 16th century. So now it is owned by the restaurant underneath, as you can see, and it is what we call a listed building. So this has to be protected and well kept by the authority. And here on the other side, we have a very interesting building in Winchester, which was actually commissioned by Queen Anne, and that most people don't normally see. Well, good, Laurie. I'm going to see if we can get up there. Do you see the statue there of Queen Anne, which a lot of people assume is Victoria, but no, it's Anne herself. Thing is, Queen Anne is not a very popular queen. She lasts about 5 years, if I remember correctly. And essentially, she has a really tough situation to follow and to actually rule the country, because she inherits after Mary II, who had pretty much deposed her father, James II, thanks to her husband William of Orange. And everybody was quite happy that James II had been, removed out of the picture, but they weren't so happy about the fact that an entire Dutch army was running around in the country. So yeah, things are going to be tough, and there's not going to be a lot of support for the monarchy. So when Anne gets into power, she's desperate for support, and Winchester is desperate for money, because it's after the English Civil War. So she comes and she essentially pays for the beautiful clock that you see in here from 1713, and what then becomes our new Guildhall. So this is, you've seen now 3, the most recent, the one from the Middle Ages and the one from the 18th century. And she essentially comes to say, well, hey guys, I'm going to give you some money. Do you make the Guildhall? You can make that clock, and you put a statue in there of me so that you sing my good graces and everybody knows what the deal is. But very unfortunately, and as much as we were of course very happy to receive her patronage, Queen Anne dies a year after we complete the whole construction in 1713. So much as we wanted it to be very successful, we just get a nice building, and that's pretty much it for us. We don't really manage to scathe anything else from that deal, which is a real shame. And before we leave, I always like showing this building, which is actually now a state agent's, but this was the Dolphin Inn, which was a beautiful Victorian inn, as you can see, mimicking or trying to mimic a part of the old architectural styles that the city still had for the sake of, you know, architectural charm and what have you not. All right, okay. I don't really know what the signal is like in Jury Street. I've not really gone through there doing a tour properly before. I think we tried it once on Facebook, and it was somewhat successful, but not, you know, not the best thing ever. So I'm gonna try and do it. If we succeed, we succeed, and if we don't, well, I will be doing a video about this in any case. So the reason why I wanted to do this is because, well, we're about to enter Jury Street, which is the old Jewish quarter of Winchester, and we don't actually often talk about the Jewish history of the town, which I think is important. It's only something we started to do recently thanks to a new monument that we've just put in here. But the monument is right at the end of the quarter. So while I get us to the monument and I move away from this very lousy bus, I will tell you about the Jewry of Winchester, because none of the buildings from that community remain. So all of the architecture that you see here is pretty new from the, you know, 18th century onwards, when we start seeing a little bit of a resurgence, but not really, you know, not a huge development in the town. So let me just cross the road first, because it's of course peak commuting time and everybody is in here today. And those bikes are loud. Welcome to the life of live stream tours, guys. As you see, we tour guides cannot escape traffic at any point. Right. This should be turning green any moment, I swear. There was nobody coming, so we will pretend that it was green and move on. Well, as I was mentioning, the Jewry of Winchester was actually one of the largest Jewish communities in this country in the Middle Ages. We had a population of about 400 Jewish people living in here, and the quarter started from the corner that we've just turned all the way to the back where we're gonna go now, plus several streets back, so easily 3 to 4 streets back all the way up to the top of the hill. Nowadays we don't have a single Jewish person registered living in the town in terms of the formal census, and that is, well, because the majority of our success as a Jewish community came from the Middle Ages, and of course the expulsion of the Jews in the 13th century is gonna get rid of our community, which explains why afterwards, when the Jewish population was invited back into the country during the reign of Charles II in the 17th century, they didn't come to Winchester. This was after the English Civil War. We were completely wrecked by the war, and therefore there was no point them coming here. It was much easier for them to go to, you know, Southampton, London, places where money was actually moving, rather than a town that was on the brink of collapsing. So the last proper Jewish community that we have record of is actually during the Second World War, because of course people from London, Southampton and Portsmouth moved to the town since we weren't bombed, and well, with that came people obviously from different religious denominations. And this, I just wanted to show you, is Century House. It's a building that was done in the 20th century as a, well, new style of architecture. We don't have many like this in the city, so it's quite peculiar in that regards. But we are approaching the back end of the Jewry, where we have this very important monument to the woman I wanted to talk to you about today, which is my dear friend Licoricia of Winchester. And I say my dear friend because, well, since her monument has come into town, I've made it my personal responsibility to actually bring awareness about her life, mission and her very nasty end to as many people as possible. As you see, although this is a very, indeed, Ronia, a road full of cars, is not necessarily a very touristy site. This is the Public Library of Winchester, by the way, which used to be the old Corn Exchange in the late 18th, early 19th century. So, although it's in the right place, because at the end of the day, a monument about an important Jewish woman, I think, should be in the Jewish quarter, that also means that most visitors or even people that come to town don't necessarily ever get to engage with it. So, I take it upon myself to, bring the awareness for those who obviously want to know. Time to do this, and the signal seems to be holding. So, obviously this was meant to happen today, right? Well, let me introduce you to Licoricia of Winchester. I'm gonna go around the whole statue just so you can get all the details while I tell you her story briefly, because I can also see that my phone is starting to shout at me for battery. So anyway, we have time. Just let me tell you about her. Now, Licoricia of Winchester is born at some point in the early decades of the 13th century. We don't have a clear date for her birth because, well, the records are not necessarily the greatest for that regards, but we know that at the moment of her death in 1272, she was probably in her early 60s or late 50s. Well, the woman was, of course, a member of the Jewish community here in Winchester. She was very well educated, and she came from a rather wealthy family. Here, by the way, you can see that we have actually commemorated the statue using not just English language, but of course Hebrew as well, just to highlight the legacy of this woman. Well, you probably had never heard about her before unless you're a very big fan of Jewish history or the Middle Ages, but this woman was actually the wealthiest person in the country during the 13th century. She was the personal moneylender of the king, particularly to Henry III, and later on to Edward I. And she's gonna be the patron for the vast majority of people in this town trying to, well, make a living at a time where the treatment of the Jewish community wasn't very nice. I'm sure you all know that there was a lot of violence, a lot of discrimination, and, well, this woman essentially stood up for all of them. Her life is quite interesting. She marries first a man called Abraham. They have 4 kids. Then Abraham will die, and Licoricia remarries to a man called Mr. David of Oxford. And David of Oxford at that moment in time was one of the wealthiest people in the country. So she inherits part of her family money plus her first husband's money. And then when she marries David, she's gonna have a 5th child, which is the little boy that you see here. In fact, let me see if I can get a little bit closer to our dear Asher, who in Winchester, according to the local records, is also remembered as Sweet Man. And they are actually, well, gonna become very, very popular because, unfortunately for us, Mr. David of Oxford seems to die within a couple of years of them getting married, and as such, Licoricia is now gonna inherit yet more wealth and another set of businesses. So I'm sure that you can imagine a Jewish woman with this much wealth becomes a huge target. Well, she will be such a good businesswoman. It will obviously rub a few feathers, and a lot of people will be unhappy with this. But she will champion this community, she will protect them, she will intercede on behalf of the Jewish people of Winchester with the king. And that's one of the reasons why things in Winchester during the 13th century are a bit smoother than in places like, for example, York, where there are a few massacres that are not necessarily, a good moment in the history of this country, and definitely not for the history record of discrimination. Well, unfortunately for us, all of this wealth of Licoricia very suddenly comes to an end when we find her in 1272 brutally murdered as a 60-something-year-old woman in her workshop, which was just farther down the road in one of the buildings that we've passed, but that doesn't exist as such. And we actually don't really have a clue as to why or how she was brutally murdered. It becomes a cold case, essentially. Her children are going to try to advocate for her, freedom for her fair trial of the potential suspects and whatnot. But instead, what ends up happening is that the issue is decided to be a robbery gone wrong. Now, when we go and looking into the record as modern-day historians, some things kind of don't feel right, because a robbery gone wrong would mean something was missing from the workshop of this incredibly wealthy woman, right? Well, that doesn't really happen. The money kind of goes missing after she gets murdered, in the interim period of her death and the trial being processed. So that has led some people to believe that perhaps there was some kind of conspiracy that wanted to get rid of Licoricia because of her wealth, because of her power and her influence at the court and in the city, and of course in terms of trade. It wouldn't be surprising, considering that she dies, just before not necessarily in government, but certainly in high places, that would have been very happy to have her eliminated from the equation. The other couple of theories that we have as well is that because, of course, a lot of people owed money to Licoricia, it's probable that some people that simply didn't want to pay her back become essentially an angry mob and just kill her. And the other option is that because she was a woman and she was Jewish, a lot of her competitors, a lot of the other businessmen that tried to buy her out or try to make her budge and essentially leave business, since they couldn't actually buy her out because she was so good at her job, they eventually, particularly in her later years when she's perhaps perceived to be weak as an older woman, they decide that the easiest thing to do is just kill her off. I cannot tell you which one of these three potential options is the right one. Maybe it's a combination of all three, but what we know is that Licoricia was an absolute champion of this community, of this town, of the Jewish people that are unfortunately no longer here with us, and that must be remembered and commemorated by more people than actually know her. And that is pretty much, I think, all we're gonna have time for today. So I'm just gonna turn the camera very quickly to say bye. Let me just do that. So, weird tour. We didn't end up doing what I planned, what I thought we were gonna be doing. But hey, we got to see inside of the cathedral, which was completely unexpected. So I really hope that for those of you watching live or watching later at home, you enjoy that. Even though we couldn't see the whole cathedral, at least we've seen part of it, and you can enjoy the beautiful architecture with that in mind and with that in consideration. Thank you very much for coping with the very sudden change in plan because the signal completely ditched us, and I hope that you enjoy as well the rest of Winchester. The weather has actually been quite nice despite the wind, and we still have been able to see some important monuments, Licoricia included. So overall, considering that we had to wing it halfway through, not too bad. I'm not gonna complain. Oh, no worries, Pranav. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tish. I'm really happy that you've enjoyed it. As an aside, what kind of mounting equipment do I use? I have two different types of gimbal. I am currently using my Hohem, which has a more steady grip for when it's windy, because I thought it was gonna be windy. And I have another one, which is an Osmo, which has a magnetic hold for the phone. So hopefully that makes some sense. Will you please keep, oh yes, Marina, this will stay on YouTube now, so I'm not taking it down. So enjoy it now, later, however many times you want. And just to let you know, I'm actually uploading, you may see it now already, a premiere is scheduled for an early tour of Winchester that I managed to salvage from my old hard drive. It's not the greatest quality, but it shows a different part of the city that we weren't able to see today. That's coming up on the 4th of June, I believe. So that will add another layer, and we'll be doing a couple of other different tours of Winchester, both as pre-recorded and as live streams now that the weather is nicer, and I hope that the wind is kind to us. So I thank you so much, guys. It's very kind. And yes, Licoricia of Winchester is definitely someone to research more. There is actually a whole charity that is keeping up her legacy now, but there is a lot more that we need to unearth from her. But that is the end of that. I'm gonna go catch the train and go back to Southampton to rest, because I've been at it since 8 o'clock in the morning. So thank you so much for coping and for being willing to go with the flow so we could have a nice reward in the end. And if you can, in the chat and in the description of this tour, you also have the ways of supporting us in Travolution Tours through PayPal and Stripe. It's always very welcome, and I'm very, very thankful for your sponsorship. And other than that, I'll see you perhaps later on this week, or if not next week, with some other tour or some other lecture. Take care, guys. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.